Tēnā koutou katoa and welcome along to our monthly Facebook Live. Tonight we're really excited to bring you Tessa McTaylor. But first, let me just share a little bit more about Tiny Nation. Kia ora, my name is Erin Maloney. I'm the founding director of Tiny Nation, and we are a home-based early learning organisation who kickstarted late last year in Hawke's Bay and have been growing into some other regions around the country. One of our big values is around fostering belonging and connection, and we want to connect. We want to connect with as many people as we can in the sector. We want to connect with other providers, with the industry, with our families and our parent communities. And a big part of how we can do that is obviously having this kind of presence online and bringing some of the biggest brains to our audiences, biggest brains in early childhood education. So we've started a Facebook Live series, and we're really excited to continue that on. So every month we have a guest speaker, and it's our way of collaborating a little bit more with the industry and bringing the best of our knowledge around early childhood education to our community. So I'm really excited tonight to introduce you to Tessa McTaylor. I'm just going to bring Tessa into the feed, so just bear with me as I do that. Kia ora, Tessa.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, thank you, Erin. How are you?
I'm good. And what we're going to do before we kick off anything is I'm going to introduce you a little bit more formally, Tessa. So I'm just going to read through your bio so that everyone can get a little bit more information about who you are and where you're from, and then we'll kick straight into it. So I've just got some notes here just so that I don't get anything mixed up. So here we go. An advocate for kindness at all education levels, Tessa has had many whats. Early childhood teacher, Montessori guide, parent and infant class facilitator, tutor for primary age children with additional needs, all linked together with the very same why, love. Now, describing herself first and foremost as a writer, she uses her way with words to inspire a kind-hearted approach to being with children. She is mama to 2 boys and is gentle and genuine in sharing this incredible journey. Tessa, along with Anja, Geelen and Kimberley pours her head, heart and hands into the Heart School, their platform used to share their own beliefs around heart-centered teaching. The Heart School has packaged up ideas and experiences into beautiful resources and services to help early childhood teachers and educators infuse their space with kindness and love. A nourishing mixture of heart-centered why and hands-on how, these original resources have a signature of being created lovingly, from the heart, for the heart, and full of heart. And we're really excited to have you, Tessa, tonight because we've delved into the Heart School and the vast array of resources that are on there. And we know that being the writer, you're the head behind a lot of it in terms of how those words hit the paper. So we can't wait to hear from you and hear a little bit about your background.
Thank you.
We'll just kick straight into it. I'm going to ask you the first question, the same question I ask everyone who joins us for a Facebook Live, and that is Tiny Nation as an organisation, we're built on what we see as being a really powerful why, you know, our purpose and our intention to be here to I guess, inspire the lives of our children and allow them to grow into and fulfill their greatest potential. You've had a big background that's kind of merged from being an early childhood education teacher. You've a bit of Montessori influence thrown in there, and more recently, obviously, a heart-centered practice and way of being with children, both as a teacher and as a mum. Do you just want to share a little bit more about your why, about that driving purpose and how that influences the work that you do?
Sure. Well, it was an accident that I came to early childhood, but it wasn't an accident that I stayed because I was primary trained and I set foot in this little tiny but beautiful preschool with beautiful people and was offered a job, and it was different for me, and I said to myself, I'll give this a month. And that was 20, meaning that setting, but also the whole sector. And that was 20 years ago. And I'm still here. So I'm not on the floor at the moment. I'm still a part of the sector. And the reason being that children are my very favourite people to spend time with. I adore children, but I also have fallen in love with childhood itself. And with that love for something like that, a love affair with childhood, it means that I want to spend my time making that childhood something really, really special, something beautiful and filled with kindness. And so the thing with, our children get one childhood and they get one early childhood period. And so the reason I moved more of a heart-centered approach is that once you realize that, the only way that made sense to me was that kindness journey. So taking that as far as I possibly could. And of course, I'm still on there because it's never ending. And one of the part of my why that I remind myself is actually a quote from Bev Boss, who was a US educator and author. And she said that your childhood takes you by the hand for the rest of your life. So that's how important childhood is. And so being in this with children, I want to do it really, really well and also inspire others to do the same. So that's it.
Awesome. So if we talk about where you've ended up, and obviously you talk about the heart a lot, let's talk about the heart school, because a lot of the audience night watching will probably be relatively familiar actually with the work that you do, because the heart school's kind of taken the sector by storm a little bit, and you've come out with some really brilliant reflective practice resources and an opportunity for us as parents and teachers to really delve into the relationship and the connection and our own why when it comes to the way that we are with our children. So what's the intention behind the Heart School, and what does your philosophy look like in practice? I mean, if you could put it into words in terms of the work that you do, because you also do a lot of workshops and training with teachers and parents out there in that space. What does that kind of look like? What's the flavour?
Sure. Well, our intention is to create these resources and these inspirations for, we say, to keep the heart at the heart of teaching. So actually, those words used earlier as well, that we're from the heart, for the heart, and full of heart. We want to inspire others to do the same thing. And the reason is working with Anja and Kimberley, we're such a wonderful little team. And we all went on a journey towards a heart-centered practice. A kinder practice with children. So when we went through our journey, and as I say, still the journey keeps going, but we decided that we'd like to share where we'd been and inspire others to do the same. And it's a little bit like we're being the helping hand and helping heart that we could have used along the way when we went through this ourselves. So what we're trying to do really is, we found, especially when we did our trainings, and the PD that we followed on from was sort of very head-centered, and we wanted to focus more on the heart. So that's where we're coming from. And it's almost, yes, there were some good parts of our training, but there were also some very clear messages. And part of the sort of 3 key messages that I feel I came away with, and I think they're similar for Anja and Kimberley, that the 3 key messages that I came out of my training with, we're almost trying to do the opposite. So I was told, and even in these words in our training, that there was no place for love in early childhood education, So it wasn't our place to show love to children. And this wasn't ages and ages ago, this was early 2000s, not, 100 years ago. And so the Heart School, we say no. There is absolutely a place for love in early childhood. And in fact, when you think of this one childhood that takes these children by the hand for the rest of their lives, there absolutely needs to be love. They need to be immersed in love. So it's challenging that. And another of those messages was that you have to leave your real self at the door. So you leave your personal self at the door and you come through as a professional, and then at the end of the day, you pick up your real self again. And again, that's not what we stand for. None of these things sort of felt right to us, and we found our way to each other, which was great. But no, we believe that your authentic self is absolutely what children need. They want to know the real us, And children are so intuitive, they know the real us anyway. You know, we can't hide it from them. But especially when we're working in teams or we've got a tribe, our real self really, really matters, because it's who we are with our children more than what we do that they pick up on. So, you know, we're not for leaving, you know, that baggage at the door, baggage if you call it that. And this other sort of idea, the other message I had was that you need, the wisdom you need for being with children is all out there. So it's in the fairest, it's something, every thought you had to back up with someone else's research. And we're actually saying, well, you know, yes, it's important to know your things. We're trained too, but you also have all this inner wisdom, and you have to be able to trust that those gut feelings you have and the things that touch your heart, they're there for a reason. So we're saying trust that gut, because we also know what children need. We've been children. That inner child is still with you. And so if you put faith in that gut wisdom you have, as well as the other, but maybe with that first, then, you know, that kind practice is really, really possible. And what we feel sometimes is what we're doing is, it's not always giving our beautiful tribe new information, but it's more we're giving permission, and that permission to follow what you already believe in your heart. You just maybe haven't been able to express that because sometimes you're trained out of it. So that's sort of our intention. And what I love about the Heart School is we're not saying there's one way you have to be. And I know you're like that at Tiny Nation as well, that it's not one strict philosophy. You know, you bring yourself to it, and you can do things your way. And yes, kindness is at the core and the heart is at the core, but how that plays out is different for each person. You know, we have our own way of doing that. But these things that we value, we're also putting things out there as ideas, and we talk about a smorgasbord of offerings. But we're not saying you have to do this or that, or you have to measure up, you know, this much to be part of what we're doing. So it's a beautiful, inclusive idea of bringing who you are. But we talk about, you know, you're bringing yourself, but it's your best self, because that's what our children deserve, and families, but in team. But, you know, children absolutely for their one childhood deserve that best version of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I can hear so much truth behind those words in terms of that authenticity. And I remember Kimberley Crisp speaking at our launch actually at the end of last year, and her theme was very much around we teach who we are and how are you. In terms of how are you doing personally, because our work and our teaching and our parenting is a reflection of that. So bringing your whole self. Absolutely. So with all of that in mind, and I know this is a burning question, and we talk about it a lot at Tiny Nation with our families and with our educators, and I know you and I have had a really brief conversation about it before tonight, and that is, you know, as parents and as teachers, we're often faced with those moments of challenging behaviours that we notice in our children, where we have those misses, those messes, and those meltdowns, for want of better words, and where things just don't seem to be going quite right. And often in those moments, we just need someone to tell us what to do, you know, particularly if it's an ongoing issue, or those challenges have been there or are there in the relationship. So if you were doing some work in that space with a teacher or with a parent who was having a specific problem around those behaviours, or trying to, you know, guide positive behaviours in children, what would your advice be to them around that?
Now, this is one I could talk on all night. I have such a heart for anybody, but young children who are sort of struggling in some way. But my view on this, and, you know, our Heart School view, we share this, is that more than the child's behaviour, what's really important is our own. So that's what we've got control of, is our own behaviour and our own response. And part of that own behaviour even starts before any of our actions, and it's in our view, so how we're viewing children, that lens we use. And often, and I've walked this journey myself actually, if we change how we view children, then we change how we feel and we change how we respond. and I've got a couple of key mindset changes or mind shifts that I like to share with people, because I think that people often have a bit of an aha moment, because often if we don't think of these things, we don't realize what we're doing. But one of those shifts I like to make is, I'll give an example actually. Say we've got a child in our group, whether it's whether it's even in our family at home, or in our home-based care setting, or our ECE setting, but a child who's often hitting and grabbing toys, and those sort of things, which could be seen as disruptive or challenging, or those things. And often that child, might be looked at as being aggressive, perhaps, or something like this. But if we instead change how we see that child, and we look at them as this little person who really wants to connect with other children and participate in this group, but really just doesn't know how. They haven't got those skills yet. What we're doing is we're changing it from the idea of this child having a bit of a character flaw to the fact that actually it's just a skill deficit. So then what we're doing is actually we can help that child learn that. So rather than having all these behavior strategies of the 1, 2, 3, this, and if you do that, then this will happen, it's actually helping them manage, noticing that that's what they're actually wanting. They're actually wanting to connect. So being there and facilitating that, and actually doing this with them. So rather than just trying to manage behavior. I say when you manage behavior, it's actually our own behavior we need to manage, not the child. So it's making ourselves available for that. But I think that's really important, a skill deficit versus a sort of flaw in who they are fundamentally, because it's just something they haven't learned yet. These children are so new to the planet. Even our 5-year-olds, if we're lucky enough to keep them in ECE, they're really, really new to this. As adults, we've got skill deficits. It's the same thing. So it's just helping them learn that. So that's one of those sort of key things. Another really important shift to make is that, I'm just checking, sorry, is that idea of misbehaviour. It's one of those terms, but actually often it's just a mismatch of needs. And it might be often it's not even, I've kind of got two good examples of this, but one of them is I often think when I see really young children at a cafe, and some young children can sit at a cafe and drink a fluffy and play with toys at a table and leave, and that's all fine. But so many of our toddlers especially cannot, including my own. When he was a toddler, it's a mismatch. It's not misbehaviour, but they're born to run around. They're born to touch things at this age. They're driven to explore their world, and they're not given a chance to do that. So what looks like misbehaviour is actually just a mismatch. And so rather than, again, trying to manage that behaviour and pulling up the threats or any of those things, it's actually thinking, is this fair and reasonable? And would a better idea be to grab a takeaway coffee and meet your friend on a big grassy field, if you happen to have very active children? Because you say, it's just a mismatch. And often, or if it's at home with our own children, it might be, is it actually about their behaviour, or is it about how you yourself are feeling? Because, I have this moment in my memory bank of me turning around to one of my children and just sort of saying, why are you pressuring me? Was what I said. And this was like an 18-month-old asking me for food. There was no pressure. This was not about him. That wasn't misbehaviour at all. The mismatch was I needed a little bit of headspace and he needed food. That's not misbehaviour. So often I think it's just putting these things in perspective. And then when you mentioned, children who are, this is coming up on a really regular basis. And that's when that sort of idea of a challenging child comes in. And one of the biggest things that I've learned on my journey, and I'm so grateful for this bit of, this experience, is to change that view of actually, this isn't a challenging child. And there's sort of, I guess, the more PC way started being to call it challenging behavior, a child with challenging behavior, but it's essentially the same thing. But what it actually is so often, and when I look at the children in the history of my teaching experience who were the ones who were, you felt like you needed to do more behaviour management strategies or whatever, these children were actually challenged, with the ED, challenged. They experience the world differently. Often it's too loud, too bright, too peoply, or even too slow for some of these children. So it's almost a mismatch again, that what they're needing isn't what our world is offering. So that's very different than a child who's deliberately being naughty. It's very hard if you think of yourself in a situation where you feel out of control. I mean, for some children, that's their whole life, and their behaviour is an expression of that. And it makes perfect sense. When you see it that way, you can be a lot kinder. And sometimes when we talk about these things, people think, oh, that just means you let children do whatever they want and you're not expecting anything of them. But it's not that at all. It's just that you're not seeing, as I say, needing to manage that behaviour. It's not the discipline kind of thing. It's actually helping them. So how can we help this child who's lashing out because it's gotten too noisy? How can we help them? Not by putting them in time out, but actually offering them things like earmuffs, or saying that, I can see, you're hitting because it's so noisy here. You need to, when you feel like that, let's come over here and do this, whatever it is, whether they need time with you or they need their earmuffs or they need a quiet activity, whatever it is. But what you're helping them, rather than changing who they are or giving them that idea that there's something wrong with them and the way they're doing things, it's actually helping them be them in the world. Because these things, often these children who this is constant for, this is going to stay with them. These things are going to be a challenge for a lot longer than just these first few months or whatever. They've got their childhood to learn how to be themselves. Some of us, that takes many, many years. So we're helping them with that. So I say it doesn't mean that we're allowing them to hit and do all of those things, but it means we come to them, so not even at them, much more kindly and with a warmer heart, because there's a big difference between, say, making a child feel really bad about who they are, or labeling them, or constantly disciplining them, because you're breaking that connection. There's a much nicer way to come and be with them and help them learn, as I say, more about themselves, and also that helps them with how to be part of a group. But it's that, that gentleness, I think, is really, really important. And I say, just remembering, I like to keep I call it little me. I often will say to myself, if something happens that's challenging, like what would I need if this were me? But also going back to, what did I need when it was me? And to keep that little me idea in my mind, because that just helps me stay in the heart a bit more when I think about the little girl that I was, who, sometimes needed a little bit of adult kindness as opposed to just being told off all the time or whatever it was. And another question I really like to ask is, like, what would kindness do right now? So, a child who's really having a meltdown or whatever, what would kindness do right now? And later you can talk strategies with them and help them for another time. But in the moment, what do they actually need? Because again, when that idea of being challenged, some of our children are like that, that the world is a difficult place for them all the time. But even, other children, just sometimes a meltdown at the supermarket, they could be challenged because they're too hot, they're too thirsty. And it's having that in mind, rather than the fact that, oh, they're doing this to drive me crazy, or those sort of things we tell ourselves. It's getting a little bit of perspective, because again, that's our behaviour. We can control that. I read it, saw it, I think, somewhere described as your perspectacles. So putting on your perspectacles, which is what I needed that time. I told my child to stop pressuring me when that's the most ridiculous thing. But, we all have moments of that, whether it's with our own child or other people's. I'm sure, grabbing our perspective is really, really useful. But yeah, those are the sorts of things that I would talk about. It's really changing how we're seeing our child in the first instance, because if we want to be kindly, we have to see them kindly. Yeah, does that?
So many great takeaways, and I've just been watching a few of the comments popping up as you've been talking, Tessa, because I think some of those things are really resonating in terms of, Joe's just mentioned love that challenged rather than challenging, and just putting that lens on things and the environment and what's going on in this environment that might be, encouraging this kind of response for this particular child, or and I love the way you talk about the skill set or the deficit in terms of a child being able to express something or do something, because it does take the emotion out of it for you as the parent or the teacher when you're looking at from that point of view. And like you say, you probably can put a much kinder lens on it and in terms of the approach.
Yes,
so the environment.
Sorry, what was that, Erin?
The environment is big, in terms of, I guess, the growing conditions, which leads quite nicely onto the next question, which is all about, obviously, the fact that we're all here because we're passionate about creating these strong, lasting foundations for our children, and we want them to realise their potential, and we want to build big, healthy brains. From your point of view, what would you say are the optimal growing conditions, or, the best kind of environment for our babies and our children to flourish?
Okay, I'll start right. What you'll probably expect me to say is a kind environment. So exactly, yes, that from seeing kindly and being kindly, that's part of the environment, because, environment's far more than furniture. You need the heart furnishings as well. So kind, and I have a real thing for warmth for children as well, for anybody, warmth in all human relationships. So, that genuine kindness. I think we also need an environment that focuses on the now, as opposed to just fully being about preparation for the next stage. So appreciating what it is our children are doing right this moment, rather than the not yet. So a place that celebrates exactly who children are. I think too often a child turns 4 and suddenly they're nearly going to school, or we're too quick to want to get them ready for the next stage. But I think one that appreciates them exactly as they are and celebrates what they can do, a strengths-based environment is so important. And that's a really neat one that we, if we're educators, we can share that with parents, because often the messages they get is very much about the not yets and the can't do's and the when will they's. But our babies and our children need us to appreciate exactly what they're doing as they are, that they're marvels, and we need to be showing that appreciation. Also have a really strong heart for nature. So I think that there needs to be nature in any environment that we are raising our children in, or access to it. Personally, I live in a house and we don't have a garden, but I make sure my boys are outside constantly. We use our community, our backyard, so our big backyard, because nature is so very, very important for our children. And I'm sure I had something else I wanted to say about environment. Let me think. Or somewhere, home-like as opposed to institutional. I think we go through waves almost of, I know when I first started in early childhood, it was a little bit like indoor playgroundy feels to the environment's just so overwhelming and bright, and those places are fun for an hour or two, but 50 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, and no, it's too overstimulating. So somewhere home-like, comfy, cozy, nurturing, and that's not just in the physical look, but in the rhythms. One of my very favourite words, and I'm a real words person, is unhurried. So children need unhurried, but to be honest, so do adults. All of us could use some unhurried, but it's so important. Often we transition children from here to there, in the car, out the car, from playing to morning tea, back to playing, back to lunch. There's just so much fast-paced and movement. But if we can slow things down and go with that natural pace of childhood, I think that's those optimal conditions. that slower pace.
Totally. And I think off the back of lockdown, we all probably have a better appreciation of that unhurried nature of life, and how it changes, like I think as a mum going into lockdown and being forced into that state of, you can't go anywhere, you can't do anything. And so you actually really relax into it. And as a working mum, I probably realised how difficult I had made situations for both myself and my children, in the lead up to lockdown, where it's like, we've got to be here at this time, and then we've got to move on to this, and hurry up, where's your bag, and where are your shoes, and it does feel sometimes like life is a big race, and so it is nice to just step back and get that lens, isn't it, of that time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. And so in terms of the work, and this is probably a teacher specific question, in terms of the work that we do with children in our early learning services, we often talk about the community and the important need to connect with our families and make sure that we're supporting their needs and considering their aspirations for their children, and they're informing a big part of the program that we deliver. How important is that relationship with families, and kind of where does it start, and what would you say to teachers who are looking to connect more with whānau and their communities, or try and reach out more to them if they're feeling that disconnect at times?
Good question. How important, it is so crucially important, and I don't even think that sums it up enough, but the relationship with the family is so important, because our young children are part and parcel with their family. You can't care for one without caring for the other. And I think, for some families, we're a huge part, especially if they've got very young children and maybe aren't living near where they were raised, we could be a huge part of their village. So it's really, really important that we're a welcoming part of the village, and we're an open part of that village. And we can sort of advocate for kindness for children, but if at the same time we're sitting in judgment of their parents and the decisions they're making, and we're sort of sitting there muttering to ourselves about, I wouldn't have done it that way, or this parent didn't leave at the right time and she made the separation go harder, or whatever, that's not kindness. That's not kindness to the child, and it's not kindness to the family. So that same kindness lens we use for children, we need to use for parents as well, because this is not an easy thing to be a parent. And so yes, we need to care for them, and we need to be really welcoming. I've been transitioning my youngest son into preschool for the first time this year, and the most important thing for me was that it was a place that we could take things at his pace. But what that meant was that parents were allowed in the gates, because there are still places where that's not the way. There are still places that you need to say goodbye at the gate, no matter how long your child's been there for. And it just doesn't make any sense to me now.
Amazing,
now, as in like 10 years now, not even just now that I've had my boy, but the parents, it is so very important. And also, I'm hoping this isn't the case anymore, but I know, and this could partly have been me when I was first teaching and not a parent, but I think we had this idea that our job was to educate parents. We're coming to educate them. Like we held all the knowledge as the professional, but actually parents are experts on their child and a whole lot of other things as well. They've got these huge areas of expertise. And so, we need to be really respecting that and talking about that and acknowledging that and letting them share with us. It's not just that we've got all this information or expertise to hand over. We need to be opening up the conversation with them so they can share with us as well. And, just as for some children, it takes longer to settle in. For some families, it does as well. We've got parents who it will be a little bit harder to get to know, but we need to keep trying. And we need to it's that genuine, being kind isn't slapping a smile on your face and saying the right things. It's actually genuine kindness. It's meaning what you say, dropping those judgments, listening when you ask how somebody is, and really caring and getting to know people, and taking things at the parent's pace. But often, if they can see as well how much, all those wonderful things you see in their child, that's a really nice way of connecting as well, because they want to hear that. And perhaps especially if it's a child who is more challenged by the environment, perhaps these parents maybe aren't used to hearing these wonderful things. So speak those wonderful things, because every child has them. And, every parent wants to hear wonderful things, because, regardless of the behaviour of their child, they adore that little person. They're giving you a treasure to look after in your day. So, that's something we need to feel honoured to do, and also honour the fact that they've done that. I'm just trying to think about what the rest of your question was. I might have gone off on a little tangent.
Beautifully, and that co-construct of the relationship, and like you say, everyone bringing something to the table in terms of knowledge and alpha, and being able to support the direction of learning and development and play and relationship for their child. It's so key. Cool. And in terms of, I guess, building on that relationship, and you've already mentioned it in terms of the optimum growing conditions for children and babies in those early and most formative years. And we talked a little bit about it when we introduced you, and your affinity with the natural world and with nature, and making sure that children are exposed to nature and really have that time to explore it through play. One of the benefits, obviously, of being a home-based provider is that you don't feel obliged to be stuck within the four walls and section of a home or of a service, and you can go out there readily and freely explore the community as the third teacher, and really kind of take children on that journey and on that adventure. What does a heart for nature look like when it comes to early childhood education? And what are some practical and inspirational ideas that you have for when it comes to reconnecting children with nature?
Okay. Well, for me, a heart for nature is you've got a love for children, you've got a love for nature, and you've got a love for the relationship between the two. Because that child-nature connection is so very, very important. And our children are born with that connection to nature, but they actually they don't need us to teach it to them, but they need us to allow it to keep strengthening. And we know that this generation of children is less free in nature than perhaps we were, and less free in nature than is ideal. So we've got that extra big commitment to make sure that that relationship stays strong. And in terms of ideas, my biggest tip, really, I guess, if you wanted to call it that, is, to don't overcomplicate it. We think we have to have these lessons planned and these outcomes, and we can't really go out there unless we know all the names of all the things that we're going to come across. But it's not the case, actually. What it starts and ends with our willingness to be out there, because it's our attitude more than our aptitude initially, because we can learn these things along with our children. And we don't need that adult agenda and deciding what they're going to learn and what they're going to explore, because if we allow our children to be out in nature, they know what to do. We need to trust our children and trust nature and let them go at their pace and let them play. As you say, that's the most important thing they can do out there. And it doesn't need to be grand. We don't have to find these absolutely amazing places which sort of suit our adult idea of what's amazing in nature. Children find everything in nature amazing. And all it is we just need to take them out there. That's the first step, is let them outdoors and observe them and let them go at their pace. And, you might go out with them if you're home-based or a parent, and, you can go out. You could be out for a very long time and be covering a tiny little space because they don't, we go for a walk in nature to go for a walk, whereas our children are going for, they're doing it differently. They're pottering about and they're playing. They're not going from A to B. They've got a completely different way of being in the world than we do. And rather than us trying to get them to fit in with us, we can be willing to get, back to how they're doing things. And it's actually much more amazing. And we can enjoy it. They're unhurried. It's seeing the joy in the ordinary. Like, how fun is a puddle? It doesn't have to be big, massive things. And one of the things that I've found really just so amazing as a teacher and then also as a mum is having an explore spot. So that idea of having like a home base, one place you go to again and again and again, the same patch of nature, and visiting it. I've done it as a teacher. Our preschool would go weekly to the same place with groups of children. And as a mum, when my children were little, we would visit every single week the same patch of, whether it's beach or bush or wherever. And, often we think our children need new all the time, or they're going to get bored, like that dreadful B word, bored. I think it's the worst thing. And you get exhausted planning all this, but also our children, if it's always new, they're trying to orient themselves to a new place all the time. But if you're taking these little children to the same place every week, they're already familiar. So their orienting time is very, very short, and their play time is huge. So they've planted those roots in this place. They know it, and they can spread their wings, and they don't get bored. They really don't. And I like to liken it like, if we were going to a different cafe every single week or day or whatever, and there are some things you expect to be there, sure, because, it's a cafe. So you might expect there's somewhere to sit and there's somewhere to pay. But each time you're kind of having to get your bearings, and you've got less energy then to engage in the chat with your friends. It's the same for children. If it's a new place and you've got to get their bearings, half the energy goes there. But for us, if the cafe was the same, we're in, we plonk ourselves down, and then we've got all our energy for chatting. And that's what our children get in the explore spot. And it's not, they don't do the exact same thing every week, because they're different every week, and nature itself changes. The weather, the seasons, there'll be different things and different things grabbing their attention. So I found that really quite amazing. And after a time, yes, you might change, but it doesn't have to be this constant new. My little one, we had the same place from when he was 1 till he was 2. And then we needed to change because it wasn't big enough for running. And running was now his thing. So then we went to a new spot for running. And that became our weekly. So, I think that explore spot is really, or whatever you'd want to call it, that's what I've called it. That almost home base is great.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a big part of the program, right? So when you're in home-based services, is having some of those weekly or regular outings and events, and like you say, fostering that familiarity is quite key, because every week there's an extension on that learning or on that play that just naturally unfolds as children grow in confidence and capability. Yeah,
absolutely.
Nice.
Yeah.
So in terms of the Heart School resources, and we know you do a workshop on nature, and you do a workshop on behaviour, and you, like you say, the way that you can view that through a kindness lens. What from the Heart School, and for those of you listening who haven't checked out the Heart School yet, you just have to, because there's some amazing resources. We actually brought the reflective journal for our educators at the end of last year as a wee end of year treat for the new year, and just some of those weekly prompts and mindfulness techniques and ways to kind of ask yourself some of those leading questions. Is just that it's brilliant to extend and to support people to start thinking a little bit more deeply about how they respond personally to things. What for you is a standout resource at the Heart School, something that you really hold dear to your heart, or is a bit of a favourite, just for those watching that are yet to kind of have a dig around the website to see what you've got on offer?
Okay. It's a little bit like asking which is my favourite child, of course. Hard to answer. But I must say I do have a really soft spot for our toddler toolkit. So our toolkit, it's got a teacher guide. So it's all about toddlers, because they're talking about the kindness lens. The mantra inside our toddler book, I hope I remember off the top of my head, but is that toddlers with a zest for life need carers with a zest for toddlers. And that's exactly the viewpoint that it is, because toddlers get such a bad rep, don't they? Whereas they're actually amazing little people, and we have a huge heart for them at the Heart School. And so this is really trying to inspire people to see toddlers differently and really offer and making that match between who they are and what they need. Because that's when you're going to really enjoy this time with them rather than wish it away, you know, when they're almost out of toddlerhood. That idea that it's an awful time to get through. It's not. It's actually the most amazing time. So with the toolkit, you get a teacher guide, a book, but we've also got some beautiful things in there, some recipes. We call them recipes, but they're word recipes. Something really special, and some beautiful posters, and a really gorgeous book about caring for parents, actually, which we've talked a little about tonight, because that's a really important topic. So I do absolutely love that toddler toolkit, but it's also closely matched. We've got a brand new toolkit at the printers. I think it was maybe being printed today. So I'll just be very quick about that, but about another topic that's hugely close to my heart and all of us at the Heart School, about core values. So it's called, I think it's A Heart That Shines, and using core values to light your path. So because that for us was a real game changer in terms of our heart-centered practice, was really anchoring on our core values. And that was how we kept the heart in our practice so strongly. So that was as a team we found that, and then we went further to explore it as our individual core values. So really, really excited for that to be launching any day now. You'll see we've posted it in the newsletter. So yeah, it's very near, and it's an exciting one. It's such a beautiful topic. Yeah.
Awesome. Oh well, we might have to do some adding to our resource bank. That sounds great.
Yeah.
So just to round it up, Tessa, it's been great, and you've given us a lot of top tips in terms of, you know, I think the words thing's really important in terms of the way that you can come up with a lens for looking at things that, you know, may only be one or two words, but just really encapsulates that feeling or that intention or that emotion. If you could kind of sum it up and round it off, as hard as that is, I know, when we're talking about such big things, what are some key messages that you would share with parents, educators, and teachers in terms of just, and you've shared a lot of them already, those little gems, things to constantly remind yourself of when you are, you know, with your children and in relationship with your children, and, you know, if you were a teacher or a parent really striving to be more heart-centered in the way that you work with children, what would you say to them?
Okay, I'll try and keep it brief. First of all, I would say give yourself some grace, because none of us are perfect at this. It's a really amazing thing to strive for, but we are going to have moments where we're not as kind as we wished. And that's okay, because what it means is, you know, you use that little face that's crumpling or those little eyes that are looking at you, and you use that the next time, you know, that's your reminder to try again. And kindness after the fact is still kindness. So yes, of course, we want to be kind, but it's not beating ourselves up when we don't get it right. We're human. Just our children are human, and we're human. So that's really important. But one thing I think was really useful for me in my journey is remembering that children can be too thin, because we've got this really important message that our young children are hugely capable. And that's such an important message, but at the same time, they're so very little. And I think when I remember that littleness can sit side by side with the capability, that's when I remember to be so heart-centered. You know, it's that littleness. I mean, I can definitely see them as capable, but that littleness is so important. And just as independence is so important for our young children, they want that. They also want to be served sometimes. They want to be nurtured. They want us to do some of those lovely things for them, even if they can do it themselves. Just like I can make my own cup of tea, but if somebody else wants to, that's great. You know, they don't have to be capable all the time. They don't have to be independent all the time. So I think it's remembering it's not an either or. There's a both and. And I think if we hold that both and in our hearts, that's really important. And as I say, just that remembering, if we really need a reminder of how to stay in our heart, see if you can tap back into that little person that you were. Because that's a really strong, you won't remember all of your memories, of course, but you'll have some idea of how you felt. Or relate it to an adult situation. You know, how does it feel to be feel homesick? Because if you've felt homesickness as an adult, then you can, this child crying because they've left their mum's left, you can really identify with that and relate to them person to person. You're not trying to distract them out of it. So trying to that empathy and relate with our children, connect with their personness as much as we can. I think that keeps us in the heart. Yeah, that's really, really important. Is that enough messages for rounding it off?
Oh, and such beautiful messages. And I think for anyone who's watching, if you haven't already checked out the Heart School, make sure you do, because Tessa truly does have a way with words, along with her partners at the Heart School, and a really nice way to take something that can feel quite intangible sometimes when we talk about connection and relationship. And give people a perspective or a lens to look through that's helpful and practical. And I know we talked about this before we came on, and we were talking about interviews and questions, and I guess some of the things that we probably all get a lot in the early childhood education profession is what are the how-tos? What would you do if, or the strategies, and it's about looking to the relationship. And like you say, figuring out what mini-me would want or need, and how that works in relation to how we are with our children. So thank you so much, Tessa. You've been amazing. You've given us a lot of top tips to take away. There's been a few comments firing around just as we've been talking. Emma's just commented on your discussions around nature and taking that familiar space and saying this really resonates with me. We go to one particular place in nature regularly, camp, walk, and just be. Carolyn's talked about how she'd love to get her hands on that toddler resource. So we might have to get one of those for Tiny Nation, Caroline, and share some love there. And Nikki's also talked about loving that, tapping into the little person that you once were. And if that's not the most personal reminder, then what is it? So thank you so much for being here with us, Tessa, and for sharing a little bit more in terms of your passion behind the Heart School and the work that you're doing in the sector, which is fabulous. So next week, actually, we've got one of your colleagues, Kimberley Crisp, with us on Monday night, introducing Dr. Mike Bedford here in Hawke's Bay, and we'll be live streaming that session with Mike too, as he is here with us in Hawke's Bay, talking about the advocacy work that he's doing in early childhood education and reform. So we're pretty amped about that, and about bringing our partners together locally in terms of other providers, and anyone who's passionate about outcomes for children. So we've got that happening next Monday, and then next month we will bring another Facebook Live to you, and we'll be bringing Ben Warren from Be Pure, talking about nutrition and holistic well-being, and probably still very connected to some of the messages we've heard tonight around that connection and that relationship and how that serves us in terms of our children and how we grow them. So thank you very much once again, Tessa. Much appreciate your time, and please do check out the Heart School for more information.
Thank you.
Ka kite, everyone. Good night.